I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's talk about the Washington Post publishing this trove of Afghanistan documents, 2,000 pages of documents through a Freedom of Information Act, which detail an internal investigation called Lessons Learned that examined the root failures of the war effort in Afghanistan. Interviews with more than 600 people, generals, diplomats, government officials, foreign diplomats, people connected to NATO, Afghan officials, etc., which found, in essence, in summary, Alexander, that no one knows what the hell is going on in Afghanistan and that the United States is just pouring in billions after billions after billions into Afghanistan, into this black hole for what has been an 18-year-old war effort, and it's going nowhere. And one of the main conclusions of this leak and this post published by the Washington Post is that it basically says that the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and now the Trump administration have been misleading the public as to the progress being made in Afghanistan, where every president has come out and said progress is being made, the war is being won, so on and so forth. Now, Alexander, I don't think this should come as a surprise to anyone and any of our viewers, correct? I mean, this is money's being poured in and it's being wasted in Afghanistan. It's been wasted for 18 years now. A lot of people are asking, why would the Washington Post, of all papers and all media outlets, a publication which is on the side of the deep state, on the side of intelligence agencies, on the side of the Defense Department, traditionally has been for war, a champion, a cheerleader of war, why would they publish this? I think that's been a big question. And I messaged you and you messaged me, and I think we came to an interesting conclusion. You can get into the merits of this conclusion. But basically, around the same time, there was an article on Zero Hedge, which read like this, the title: Amazon accuses Trump of seeking to harm political enemy Jeff Bezos in awarding Jedi contract to Microsoft. I'm going to read you the first couple of paragraphs, Alexander. Keep in mind, I'm sure everyone knows, but keep in mind if you don't, that Jeff Bezos does own the Washington Post. So keep that in mind. Here's the first couple paragraphs. The war between the world's richest man and the world's most powerful man is getting hotter by the day. Online retail giant Amazon.com accused the world's powerful man, President Trump, of exerting improper pressure on the Pentagon to keep the lucrative cloud computing deal from going to his perceived nemesis, the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos. In a complaint filed in the U.S. Court of Federal Claims in Washington, Amazon said the president launched repeated public and behind-the-scenes attacks on the contract and the company to steer the contract away from Amazon and towards Microsoft. Trump's aim was to harm his perceived political enemy, Jeffrey P. Bezos, according to the complaint, which was made public on Monday. While Amazon had long been considered the favorite to win the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, or JEDI contract, which is valued at as much as $10 billion over the next decade, the DoD eventually gave the contract to Amazon's cloud competitor, Microsoft. What do you make of that? Because a lot of people say, why would they post that? Why would Washington Post do that?
Why indeed?
Retribution? Maybe Bezos is sending a message?
I think he is. I mean, I think he's got lots. He's the sort of person who's going to have lots of information about lots of things, and this is a good opportunity now when he feels angry to make trouble and to embarrass Trump, who's of course the president at the moment, who's still presiding over this war, even though it's a war that Trump himself is trying to end at various times. So I actually think that's very plausible, knowing how Bezos works, that this is partly what he's doing. But I also think that there's a great deal of recrimination within the US military, political, industrial, intelligence community about Afghanistan and about what has gone wrong. And the very fact that there's been this internal investigation to look into all of this really points to that. In fact, this story reminds me a little bit of the Pentagon Papers that we've all heard about, which was published in the early 1970s. The Pentagon Papers, for those who don't know, were a study of the Vietnam War commissioned by the Pentagon to find out what had gone wrong, why the Vietnam War had been such a disaster, such a debacle. And of course, what happened was that in that case, we know exactly why it was published, because a whistleblower came forward, Daniel Ellsberg, and gave it to the New York Times, which is then a very different newspaper, and it was published in an open and above board way. This is a very similar study, carried out, I suspect, for a very similar purpose, but the reasons for its publication look completely opaque and unclear, and they give every sign of being part of this enormous internecine Washington war that is going on, one aspect of which unquestionably is the ongoing battle between Donald Trump, the president of the United States, and Jeff Bezos, who, to be very clear, is not just a businessman, or not even principally a businessman. He is a major political actor in his own right.
Okay, so get into exactly what this lessons learned. Interesting name, by the way. This lessons learned report kind of outlines of what it states. What are your thoughts about the conclusions that it makes? All the interviews, 600 interviews.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
2,000 documents. This is a pretty massive undertaking.
Well, indeed. I mean, the first thing to say is that it talks about lessons learned. There are lots of lessons to be taken from Afghanistan, but I predict they won't be learned. I mean, what we've seen is the same sort of people. The Washington blob, as it's called, is going to go on pushing for wars like this at every opportunity and all the time. I mean, that's what it does. So it's not going to learn any lessons from this. But going back to Afghanistan and the war there, I think that it repays looking back to how it all began. There was 9/11. 9/11 happened. The US intelligence community traced it back to Al Qaeda. The person who the US intelligence community said was the leader of Al Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, was based in Afghanistan, and they were going to go into Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden. That was what they said. Now, of course, the problem with that was that the then Afghan government, the Taliban, gave indications at that time that they were prepared to hand over Osama bin Laden, but the United States wasn't prepared to negotiate. There was a discussion about, putting it in front of an Islamic court. The US said, no, these things usually take a little time to sort out. The US wasn't prepared to wait. So they invaded Afghanistan, and they didn't really have any kind of plan for the country. They didn't really know how they were going to stabilize the country. They had grandiose ideas. And I remember this so well, about using Afghanistan to leverage a position in Central Asia, that the US was going to use Afghanistan as a kind of forward base to penetrate into former Soviet Central Asia, part of Russia's sphere of influence, where China is very strong. But these plans, as always, nobody really sat down and considered how actually practical they were. There was talk about building all kinds of pipelines across Afghanistan to sort of avoid the Russians, to try and get Central Asian oil and gas, which wouldn't have to pass through Russia. Again, nobody really sat down and thought through how practical all this was.
Is it plausible, though? Were these plausible ideas, or just
no? They were not plausible
absolute
ideas.
Stupidity.
They were absolute stupidity. I mean, if you actually understood the region and Afghanistan, you would have known that this is completely unrealistic. And it all happened against a backdrop of the United States at that time, the US military, convinced of its own military invincibility. I remember a US analysts, military analysts, being discussing this all on the BBC. And believe it or not, there was a Russian analyst there too. And he said, the Russians said to the American, well, we had all these problems in Afghanistan. Do you really know what you're doing? And the American came back and said, well, our troops are far better trained than yours ever were, far better equipped than yours ever were. It'll be a cakewalk for us. But, the one thing they never had was a plan for Afghanistan, because they didn't know the country very well. They didn't know the region very well. They went in, as I said, convinced that whatever they tried to do, they would succeed in doing, because they were so powerful and so strong and so rich. And of course, it didn't work out the way they expected, because they didn't really understand that this is a very difficult country to occupy. It's incredibly mountainous. Many parts of it are very mountainous. The people are poor, but they have a very strong martial tradition. They are always willing to fight outsiders. And of course, all these grandiose plans about pipelines and penetrating into Soviet Central Asia and all the rest were almost by definition going to antagonize and annoy all the surrounding major powers. The Russians were concerned, the Chinese were concerned, the Iranians were concerned, and of course the Pakistanis were also concerned, because they didn't want the sort of giant superpower like the United States doing all of these things on Pakistan's doorstep. So they didn't understand Afghanistan. They didn't understand the region. They massively overplayed their hand. They were hugely overconfident. They didn't have a plan, a real plan for the country. They had all sorts of grandiose ideas, which were ultimately completely unworkable. So not surprisingly, it all fell apart. What is wrong, what is even worse, is that even after it became clear that it had fallen apart, far too many people were politically and financially invested in this thing to actually pull away. So this aimless, pointless war has continued for 18 years with absolutely nothing being achieved. I mean, Osama bin Laden was eventually killed, but not in Afghanistan, but in Pakistan, where he was hiding. Al-Qaeda is still there. The threat from Islamic terrorism is as great as ever, it seems. Nothing, none of the objectives that the US said it had been achieved. And what has happened, and again, these papers show the extraordinary scale of the US commitment. I mean, 800,000 US troops have transited through Afghanistan. $1 trillion has been spent on the country. I mean, compared to what the Americans have invested in Afghanistan, the Soviet involvement in Afghanistan, which lasted only 9 years, is completely dwarfed. I mean, it's the American investment is on a far bigger scale. And as I said, it's not succeeded.
Can you conclude in very simplistic terms that going through these documents and what's happened in Afghanistan over 18 years, the fact that the U.S. is still there and no one really knows why they're there or what's going on, including myself, I have no clue what I'm doing there.
No.
Can you conclude that this has been one giant con job via the military-industrial complex?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the reason they're there is just for money to get poured in, these huge military budgets, and then it just comes right back out. I mean, that's what's essentially happening at this moment in time as we speak, and that's what's going to continue to happen for the next 10 years.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. I mean, let's be very clear. What it is now, and what it has been for a very long time now, is a war to save some people's face. The military doesn't want to look like they've lost. The politicians don't want to look like they've lost too. So they're just pressing on with a war that has no point. But of course, it isn't just that. It's also a war in which some people are making huge amounts of money. I mean, we're talking about $1 trillion. $1 $1 trillion has gone into the country, and all of it's gone out again. It's gone to contractors, it's gone to corrupt officials. Much of it has ended up in the hands of heroin traffickers, because Afghanistan is the major center now of heroin trafficking, and those sort of people have all kinds of connections with people in all kinds of financial services and whatever it is. I mean, lots of bad things like that are going on. So lots of people are making lots of money out of this war. So there's an interest in saving face. There's an interest in keeping the dollars flowing, and it's been paid for, of course, in lives. Some American lives. The one thing the US has been reasonably successful in doing is keeping its casualty rate down, so at the cost of massive spending in terms of the way it conducts these wars. But lots of other lives, Afghan lives, have been sacrificed to this for no point, because in 10 years' time, if this war goes on for another 10 years, which it might very well do, it'll be exactly the same.
Alexander, each president from Bush all the way to Trump, Bush, Obama, Trump is powerless, seems powerless compared to the military-industrial complex. In other words, they can't get out. I mean, Trump showed that in Syria as well. He said many times, I want to get out, he can't. Afghanistan is a perfect example of different presidents, Republican and Democrat, saying that Obama and Trump specifically, both of them said they want to disengage from Afghanistan. They haven't been able to get out whatsoever. Is that just going to continue with every president going forward? Is that what this shows, that the U.S. president is absolutely powerless compared to the military-industrial complex? That's my first question to you. And my last question to you, so you can wrap up this video, Alexander, is a little bit of a historical kind of question that I have. Is it true that Afghanistan played a key role in bringing down the Soviet Union? And if the U.S. continues to remain in Afghanistan, does it risk meeting the same fate?
Yeah.
So two different questions for you to wrap up.
Two different questions. Okay, let's begin with the first one, which is, does the American president have the power to change this? Well, the short answer is, with great difficulty. There is a difference, in my opinion, between Trump and Bush and Obama. Trump, I think, generally wants to end this war. I mean, he understands that this war is going nowhere. He's made his skepticism about it very clear. He's had arguments with the military about this. Bush was the president who sent the military into Afghanistan. Obama pretended that he was against the war, but he was never really going to fight to get the US troops out. Trump is different, and it's possible, it's just possible, if he wins re-election in November, that he will feel strong enough politically at that point to take on this horde of people in the blob, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NGOs, the military-industrial complex, large sections of the media, all those people, and he might just possibly end this war. I wouldn't put any money on it. It's even then, even an electorally victorious Trump, victoriously re-elected Trump, would struggle to do it because the resistance is so strong. And we've seen in the impeachment proceedings how Washington bureaucrats are now quite open, that they consider that if the president goes against what they wish, he's not exercising his constitutional duties, he is committing treason in their eyes. So, that's what he's up against. But perhaps there's a chance. I can't see that chance with any of the Democrats that are being talked about. I mean, I can't imagine Joe Biden, if he's elected, or Elizabeth Warren, or I can't get his name right, Buttigieg, or whatever his name is. I can't imagine any of these people standing up to the military in that way. I think even Tulsi Gabbard, if she were to break through, which I don't believe she will, by the way, I think she would also struggle in the same way that Trump has done. I think she would face the same kind of resistance that Trump has faced. And I suspect she'd find it more difficult than Trump would, because at least Trump has a very strong base, I don't really think that Tulsi Gabbard does, actually. So I think Trump might just be able to do it, but it would be very, very tough. Now, did the war in Afghanistan bring about the collapse of the Soviet Union? The short answer is no, it didn't. I know this is a heresy for many people, but the Soviets went into Afghanistan. They made all the same mistakes that the United States did. They too thought that they'd be able to resolve this thing very quickly. Though I would add, if you go through the Soviet papers, there was actually much more of an internal debate within the Soviet government about whether this was a good idea. And the Soviet prime minister at the time, a man called Alexei Kosygin, was very skeptical. Another official called Mikhail Suslov was also very skeptical. There was a sort of push and pull. But eventually the hardliners prevailed. They all went in. They all thought that their military would succeed and they'd be able to turn it round. The war didn't go very well. They did, however, succeed in doing one thing, which is that which the US has never quite succeeded in doing, which is that they did create in Afghanistan a stable government led by a man called Mohammad Najibullah, who was actually quite a strong personality and did actually attract quite a lot of support in Afghanistan and was there to give the Soviets cover when the Soviets decided to pull out. And the Soviets made the decision, which the United States has never made, to pull out. But the internal crisis that ultimately overwhelmed the Soviet Union, despite what you see, films like, Charlie, whatever his name was, War, and all those films, the idea that it was Afghanistan that brought the Soviet Union down is a myth. Having said that, it didn't do the Soviets any good. And of course, it didn't help, the political mood in the country that they weren't able to succeed in that war. It's important to say, by the way, that the Soviet Union itself collapsed before the government the Soviet Union was supporting in Afghanistan collapsed. So it sort of preceded it. But anyway, it was not a helpful issue for them. But the other thing to say is, however you add up the figures, the Soviets invested far less financially and economically in the war in Afghanistan than the US did. They suffered higher casualties, in part because the medical and logistical services to look after their troops were far less advanced than those the US has. But in terms of the actual amounts of money they invested in Afghanistan, it's tiny. The US has invested many multiples more. I mean, it's on a completely different scale. And that, I think, is what the US cannot afford to do. So many of America's problems, in my opinion, are because it is conducting this massively overambitious foreign policy, throwing money into the valleys of Afghanistan, which ought to be used to develop the US economy itself. And I think that, not only is Afghanistan not helping, I think these commitments are probably doing more damage to the US, and Afghanistan might be doing more economic harm to the US than Afghanistan did to the USSR economically. So politically, militarily, I think it's about the same. Economically, as I said, for the US, Afghanistan has been a much bigger burden.
Yeah, it was in Afghanistan where empires go to die.
Well, indeed so. Well, there is a view. There is another way of looking at that, which is that there's something about Afghanistan that attracts empires that are, at the cusp when they're about to die. The British sent their troops into Afghanistan in the 19th and early 20th century, and it didn't turn out very well for them either. It was a disaster, in fact. And again, it's that point when empires overextend themselves.
Why is that? What do you think attracts the empires to Afghanistan? It's
right.
It's geography.
Yeah.
What is it?
It is geography. It's because of where it is, not because of what it is, but where it is. If you look at it on a map, it looks attractive because it looks like the pivot between four very important areas. There's China to the east, there's Iran to the west, there's Russia and its various allies in Central Asia to the north, and then there's the Indian subcontinent to the south. So the assumption always is if you can control this place, you're in charge of the pivot, and you can somehow put pressure on all of these other places. And in fact, what people discover is that yes, it is the pivot, but it's also very remote. It's incredibly inhospitable territory. The people are very difficult to manage, and they have a martial tradition. So they always go wrong because it's just a place that's too far. It's too far from the centers of power of even powers as mighty as the United States or the Soviet Union used to be.
Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Click on that notifications bell to make sure you get notifications when we publish a new video. Check us out on iTunes and on Soundcloud as well to get an audio copy of this video. And donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. Your donation really helps out this channel. And look for us on duranvideo.com and BitChute. Duranvideo.com is our own video platform, so we invite you to check that out as well. And BitChute is the free speech video platform. We post all our videos on BitChute as well, and we post everything we do on Telegram. Telegram is where you can keep in touch with everything that goes on at the Duran community, including discounts and really great codes that we're running, like 20% off the Duran shop, the duranshop.com, with a DRN20 discount. Put DRN at the checkout page and you will get 20% off anything, Alexander, we have in our shop.
Oh, indeed. And we have such wonderful things in our shop. Now, I mean, I start always with our magic mugs because they're so amazing, but here's the one I'm drinking from at the moment. We're comparing Russian policy with American policy. As you can all see, this mug has the coat of arms of the Russian Federation. And Alex has been drinking from the exactly same mug. You see, two great minds think alike. We didn't coordinate this. This is just chance. We found ourselves drinking from the same mug. I reiterate what I said. The Russians handled their mess in Afghanistan rather better than the US did. So there we are. But these are great mugs, perfectly beautiful porcelain, wonderful to hold, light, extremely strong, beautiful to feel. They don't chip, they don't crack. You can drink from them lots of times and they look as good as new. I've had this mug lots and I've drunk from it to a huge amount and it looks perfect. It looks pristine, in fact. And we've got lots of other mugs also in our shop, beautiful mugs. Alex has been extending our product line, but we don't only have mugs. We've got fantastic shirts, like this polo shirt I'm wearing now, 100% cotton, beautifully dyed, as you can see, this in a navy blue color, and with the Duran double-headed eagle there, which is different from the Russian one, by the way. We have the double-headed eagle because it points to the east and the west. It looks to the east and the west, but you will find it on our shirts. This is embroidered. On some of our shirts, it's printed. On our polo shirts, it's always embroidered. And you will also find we've got lots of other shirts. We've got long-sleeve T-shirts, short-sleeve T-shirts. We've got V-neck shirts, all of the same amazing quality, 100% cotton, incredibly comfortable to wear, incredibly stylish to be wearing. And we've also got hoodies and hats and stickers to complement these great things. They make amazing Christmas gifts, this being the time of Christmas when one is looking for these things. So help yourself, buy these things for yourself and your family and your friends. Help the Duran also. DRN20, as Alex said, is the discount code. Christmas is the time to buy and own these fantastic things. So what are you waiting for? Come to our shop. Alex will tell you how.
DRN20 at checkout. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.